going to try and attempt to pronounce this author's name without reading it. It is Mechthild Gläser. Please forgive me. I just can't. Today's book is The Forgotten Book. Obviously, it's a library book. I have been accruing fines, and eventually I was like, oh my gosh, I just need to read it. So I did read it in one day. I sort of had to force myself to do it, not because it was a bad book, but just because I probably would have taken my time otherwise, but I didn't have time. So there you go. I enjoyed it enough that I do have another book by this author called The Book Jumper, which I thought that they were connected, but they're actually not. So it doesn't matter which order I read them in. The Forgotten Book, it wasn't bad. I enjoyed it. I did think that this was a little bit misleading. I'll read it to you. Emma is used to things going her way. Her father is headmaster of her prestigious boarding school. Her friends take her advice as gospel, and she's convinced that a relationship with her longtime crush is on the horizon. Then Emma finds an old book in an abandoned library, and things really start going her way. Anything she writes in the book comes true. But the power of the book is not without consequences, and Emma soon realizes she isn't the only one who knows about it. Someone is determined to take it from her, and they'll stop at nothing to succeed. The arrogant, aloof, and irritatingly handsome Darcy de Winter becomes Emma's unlikely ally as secrets are revealed and danger creeps ever closer. So it's not wrong, but I had a different impression as to what kind of character Emma would be. I thought she'd be a bit more of that stereotypical popular girl who her friends may or may not need to listen to, but they do anyways. And she wasn't. She's pretty average. Like, I enjoyed her. I did. I thought she was funny. I thought she was witty. She was very human. But I don't think she quite matches up with who I was presented. And that reminds me, somebody compared this book to Pride and Prejudice, and I couldn't see it. Sure, one of the love interests is named Darcy, and there is a good bit of Pride and Prejudice involved. And maybe because I haven't read Pride and Prejudice in so long that I forgot the nuances of it, but I did not think The Forgotten Book was that similar to it. They did have to get over certain things in order to see eye to eye, but basically what happens is, actually, let me backtrack a bit. I didn't always enjoy the writing style. It's set in the past tense in that we open up with Emma arriving at school, and we learn that she had to walk from the train station because her dad forgot to pick her up. But now she is here, she runs into her mortal enemy, and, she survives. But, yes, she survives. And then we jump into the next scene that sort of backtracks, saying, and that was the day that everything happened. I didn't really care for the way we would be in a scene, and then our next scene would kind of recap what we're about to experience because it takes place before the rest of the scene we're going to get into. And that's part of my problem with past tense perspectives, is that we get into stuff like that. But in any case, that day had decided, because she'd been reading about Skull and Bone Society at American universities like Yale. Has anybody seen The Skulls with Paul Walker and Joshua Jackson? She's like, I'm gonna create something here. So she gathers her best friend Charlotte and her other new friend Hannah, who is her new roommate, which I was a little surprised by how well they were getting on, considering they'd only known each other for a couple of days. I would have thought that all three of them had been friends for some time. Not that I'm complaining, but it surprised me when I learned that they'd only known each other for a short period of time. But they decide, because Emma's dad is the headmaster of the school, that they are going to use the never used West Wing library for their new club. And this, I thought, could have used, like, there were quite a few things about this book that stopped me from loving it. I liked it, but I did not love it. I would not say it was a waste of my time, but I wish that I was like, whoa. So there were quite a few, some plot or subplots that I thought could have used a little bit more, and then some characterizations that I thought could have used a little bit more. But this is something that I thought could have used a little bit more, because they want to use this library, but she doesn't have a clear idea as to what kind of secret society she wants to start. And then she decides, oh, well, it'll be about books. But none of us particularly care for reading. So, okay. And then their first meeting, she has a crush on this guy named Frederick. And she blurts out, oh, hey, you should come to our first meeting. And he's like, oh, what's it about? And she's like, I don't know. He doesn't end up showing up, and they watch Shakespeare in Love, so it's a book-based movie. I thought it would have been more interesting if she'd had a better idea as to what she was doing. Otherwise, I felt like it was a flimsy reason for this book to happen. But while they are cleaning out this forgotten library, there is a piece of furniture that they cannot move. So Emma is cleaning it out, and she discovers a false bottom. And inside this false bottom is a book. This turns out to be a chronicle of the school's past. So it used to be a castle. At some point, it was turned into a school. From the 1700s, people have been writing about what's going on in this castle. At this point, Darcy and his friend Toby show up, and we're like, who are these people? And that was something I thought was strange. And maybe that's the difference between a European school and an American school. Darcy's family, the De Winters, own the building. So it's like they don't own the school, but they own the building. And he had been at this school a number of years prior. His twin sister Gina disappeared, so he left. But now he's back. We don't really know why. Word is that he's just on a European vacation and he wanted to stop by, but they're gonna stay for a couple of weeks. And for me, I was like, okay, I get it. Your family owns the building, but you don't have any right to drive up and demand lodging. Plus he gets food and he gets to attend all of the events at this school. I thought it was strange, but again, that could just be cultural differences. Eventually what we learn is that he's trying to find Gina. He's trying to figure out what happened to her. Nobody knows. There's no clue as to her whereabouts. Meanwhile, Emma has this book. She doesn't know that it's special. And for me, it was quickly obvious that Gina had this book and had written in it. And so I was like, why do you not just go to the end of the book and read the most recent entries? Glacier kind of explains it as, I guess, it was a little unclear to me, that entries are not always there. Like, they come and they go. So maybe that's why Emma didn't always see Gina's entries. I don't know. She was kind of flighty. So that could be it, where she doesn't always recognize important things. In terms of the entries, I thought those were strong. I did find, especially at the beginning, like the first time that something happens and Emma realizes, whoa, I kind of predicted this, I had to go back and make sure that I hadn't missed her entry, because we are told that she makes an entry, but none of it concerned the events. Because what happens are basically two of the staff starts making out in the middle of the lunchroom, and I was like, wait a minute. Things aren't always in order. So it's like the entry that we get was not actually the entry that pertained to that incident. It was a later entry. I wished that the entries had come in a different order, like they had been more chronological. And this was something where I felt like plot and characters could have been better. We get 4 main writers. There is the original De Winter, Gina, Emma, and then a writer named Eleanor who had gone on to fame and fortune. Okay, so the original De Winter, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, eventually we'll figure out what he's talking about, and we do and we don't. You all know me. I've been trying to get better about this, but I did read the end. I was like, okay. So I sort of was gonna figure it out anyways, but I figured out the mystery behind Eleanor. And then obviously with Gina, I was like, it's not that hard to figure out. If you are in 2017 and these other entries are dated in like 2013, who was writing in the book? Part of the entries had to do with this fawn, this mythological creature that had been created, and then everybody was basically scared of it. And so it called on this fairy, or it prayed, or sent up a wish, and this fairy fell down, wrapped him in like this gossamer cape, and said, nobody's gonna be afraid of you while you're wearing this, but be careful who you reveal yourself to, because if they reject you, then something bad's gonna happen. We are just expecting danger all the time because of this mythological fawn, this story that we get. And I thought that was really intriguing. I quite enjoyed it. I could not wait to see how it was going to play out. Big spoiler here. I kind of have to go back to the beginning in order to spoil the end. We have quite a few key players. Darcy, Emma, Frederick, who is Emma's crush at the beginning. He's a couple years older. We have Gina. There is a teacher named Miss Whitfield, the fawn, and then De Winter, the early guy. Oh my gosh, how to. Start at the very beginning. Eleanor is from the 1700s. She comes and she visits the De Winters when she's 17, 18. She is starting to hear these ghost stories about this castle. Nobody will tell her. Eventually she gets one of the servants to tell her, and they are like, so there was a monastery, and the brothers built a paper mill on some sacred ground. All these bad things started to happen, but the original De Winter wanted these books made. Bad things happened when they were trying to make the paper for it, but they were able to make 7 books. From these 7 books, one was given to basically a servant, and then the other were given to his wife. So they get really wealthy because whatever they write in these books happens, but then bad things started to happen. They destroy the 6 books, but then this one book cannot be found because this manservant had it. Not actually the original De Winter, it was somebody before him. Eleanor is like, well, I want to find this fawn. Obviously, there's a bit of magic involved in the book, but for me, this is when it kind of took a turn for the worse. Not that I didn't like it, I just thought it was a little hard to swallow that we were gonna get that magical, mystical. One night, she's looking outside of her window and she sees the fawn. She ends up scaring him away, but then she spends night after night after night waiting for him. Eventually, he realizes that she's not gonna hurt him, she's not a bad guy, and they form this great friendship. She had discovered the book because earlier De Winter, who had been writing in it, had gone crazy. He had no heirs, so he wanted to create an heir. So I guess in this instance, we're believing that what he's writing is actually fact, and that he'd had this underground laboratory and he'd created the fawn. So she had discovered the book and she'd been writing in it. She was like, she had discovered her talent for writing and she really liked fairy tales. And she said, I'm going to write a happily ever after for the fawn. She ends up killing him. There is something about a bad fairy, and then so what she tells Emma at the end of the book as she's explaining the story of the fawn. She's like, this basically the story got out of hand and I couldn't control where it ended, and this is why the fawn died because of what I did. I understand that a story can kind of write itself. You might have an idea, but the characters will just talk and things will just happen. But I thought it could have used a little bit more explanation, and maybe that got lost in literal translation. Maybe it was, you get a different feel. It's kind of like translating Hebrew or Greek. You just miss something. She was devastated by the loss of the fawn. She's like writing in it saying, I'm leaving and I'm gonna leave this book here and basically I'll live on forever without it. And the book took this and said, okay, so you're never gonna die. 200 years in the future, she's meeting Emma. She would come back now and again, and so she came back after Gina disappeared, and so this is why she's here, and she is the one who, well, technically there's two people who are trying to find this book. One is her, because she wants to destroy it, and two is Frederick, because going back a little into the past, Gina had found the book. We don't really know if she understood the power of the book. We get the impression that a lot of people writing in this book did not understand that it had magic in it. But in any case, Gina was extremely unhappy. Darcy was not giving her any attention. She was having a hard time fitting in at this new school. She must have found this book, and she learned about the fawn. And then she meets Frederick, who was not wealthy. So he was one of those few kids at this school who was kind of a scholarship student. He played into this belief of the fawn. Things went awry between them, but then she kind of wrote him into the story of her escape because she was deeply depressed. So she talks about death. So kind of writes him into abetting in her demise. We learn from her, him, her, both, whatever, that yeah, he was unintentionally coerced into rowing her out to the middle of the river. She falls in, somehow she's rescued by a boat, and she ends up at the end of the world, which is a gas station in Newfoundland. There's no memory, and so that's how we end up finding her, is that as Emma and Darcy are parsing the meaning of certain things that have been written down by her, they're like, okay, so things happen in this book, but not always the way we think. So, two possibilities. She did die, or she's at a place called the end of the world, or like Land's End or whatever. Emma does some digging, some sleuthing, and discovers a news article about a girl with amnesia, and they find her. Upon seeing Darcy, she regains her memory. They, along with Miss Whitfield, who had accompanied them, burn the book. Miss Whitfield, who is Eleanor, disappears, and there we go, happy ever after. Fawn, I was really disappointed in where that went, because we get really great creepy moments, scary moments, intriguing moments as to like what creature was created. Is the fawn still around? This and then he's been dead for 200 years because of a story that a girl wrote and got out of hand. I don't know. It drove the novel, and then it came to an abrupt halt. Kind of the book in a nutshell. We learn that, and this was something I didn't really care for. Emma had been pining after or over Frederick for a year-ish. We get into this new school year, and she has renewed hope, and he seems to be flirting with her. She gets really drunk. It's like he's trying to get information out of her, and then all of a sudden he's gone, which these characters tend to do. Like, you'll turn around and there's gone. She passes out in the driveway of her school, only to be discovered by Darcy and Toby, who bring her back to her room, and in her drunken state, we learn that maybe Darcy actually likes her, which they do get together. And And I love this about her. She's not a pushover. No matter that there are people who think they're better than her, she's like, I don't really care. I'm going to say what I want to say. I'm going to put you in your place. And so when he does admit his feelings to her first, my thought was like, did she write this into the book? Because this feels very out of character for him. But so he's leaning in for that kiss, and she's like, stop now, wait a minute, put a little what in it? Which that actually does not apply whatsoever to the situation. But yeah, she just puts the skids on it. It was kind of cool because, okay, granted, she's 16, he's probably 20. I thought it was kind of cool how she expected him to be really upset with her. And he said, look, I told you how I felt, and that was the truth. You told me how you felt, that was the truth. Like, I'm okay with the fact that you didn't like me back. I really liked the way that she acknowledged this guy expects to get his way with everything, and I don't actually like him. He might be attractive and he might be growing on me, and I might not have a thing for Frederick anymore, but like, no, not gonna happen. So I enjoyed the way that they approached the relationship, that they went from enemies to lovers essentially. But Frederick, this kind of came out of nowhere. She has a little drinking binge and he disappears, and she writes it into the book that she doesn't see him for a minute. Next thing we know, they're getting ready for a school event. And then at that school event, she sees him chatting with her arch enemy. When she's like, okay, yeah, like, come on over, let's dance, he completely ignores her. And then he's dancing with Hannah. And then the next day, Hannah's like, are you sure you're okay? I didn't want to step on any toes, da-da. And Emma, truthfully, is like, I really don't care. I'm over it. I'm like, so how? It was a little fast for me. I mean, I liked that she was moving past him because he was quite frankly annoying. For someone who was obsessed with her crush, you sure got over that fast. I mean, maybe another guy will do that to you, even if you're not actually interested in them. Frederick, I'm trying to remember exactly why. I think because he had been living in fear that Gina's disappearance / death would be placed on him, and because he was poor and because his family could never really escape that kind of stigma if anything got put on him as being involved, he was trying to get information from Emma about, because she had kind of told him about things from the book, and he didn't really take them seriously because she was drunk. But then when he's talking to Hannah, he's like, oh my gosh, maybe some of these things actually have some credibility. So he gets obsessed, and he eventually steals the book and starts writing stuff in it. And then he is going to pin the murder of Gina, or not even, like, he was just going to basically have her bones show up. He went insane, and I felt like that came out of nowhere. Plus, he'd been leading Emma on, at least one night led Hannah on, and the next thing we know, he's been secretly dating Emma's arch enemy for, I don't know, weeks, months. He gets caught climbing out of her window, and this didn't make sense to me because Charlotte is roommates with this girl. So I get it, at some points Charlotte was not always in the room, and they did have rendezvous in, other places. I'm pretty sure that you would have seen something, and there's one moment where you get the feeling that Charlotte isn't telling the truth about it, but then that's not pursued any longer, and so I was like, okay, so what does his sleeping or being in a relationship with a student have to do with anything in this book? It played no part whatsoever, except that the arch enemy basically gets her comeuppance. I don't know if she leaves the school per se, but she definitely gets out of Dodge for a minute. And then we have Charlotte and Toby, where I don't know how I feel about this. They are interested in each other, And then this I'm okay with. Eventually Toby starts pulling away and we have no idea why. And we learn it's because he's led to believe Shirley has a boyfriend. But then even after he learns that she doesn't have a boyfriend, he stays away. Because Darcy's essentially said, like, I don't trust her, so you shouldn't either. He may or may not have been misled by Frederick. And actually, I think what it was a misunderstanding. Because Frederick had been coming from a rendezvous with his secret girlfriend, which was Charlotte's roommate. And so Darcy had been under the impression that he had been coming from meeting Charlotte. This is why he thought that they were dating. All the things that he thought were suspicious were just more misunderstandings. But eventually then he's like, okay, fine, Toby, do whatever you want. This girl's okay. And they get back together. And so that was a cute little romance there. Although I still, in some respects, there were just one too many events, subplots going on in this book. For me, the strengths were the fawn and the mystery. Like, there was a moment right when Emma is discovering the magic of the book. And she had been writing it, hadn't been writing it, something about that. She wakes up and the window's open. She'd been having, I think maybe what it was she's been having this really weird dream, nightmare, which I still don't quite understand. It had something to do with a paper dragonfly and her name being mentioned all the time or whispered all the time. She takes the book and goes to the kitchen because she's hungry. But she closes the window. And then she comes back and she's like, the window's open again. And so we're like, what in the world? Like, is the fawn real or whatever we are at this point with the magic? It's actually Darcy, because in his attempt to learn about Gina, Emma and Hannah were in Gina's old room. So he broke into their room trying to learn stuff, and while she was sleeping, he read the Chronicle thinking it was maybe a diary, and then he realized that it was Emma's diary, and then hadn't had a chance to read more because she woke up. And so he's the one that opened the window, and then when she went to the kitchen, he left through the window. So there was nothing untoward going on, nothing crazy. It was just a guy trying to figure out what was going on with his sister. So I liked how creepy it was at first. It set a good tone. And then I kind of liked how there was a rational explanation at the end. Because, yeah, I just did. Forgotten book, it kind of lost its way towards the end. I was underwhelmed by the entries. I thought those could have been stronger. I thought they could have been more relevant. I thought they just could have been more prevalent. Even with the bad things that started happening in the book, they weren't that bad. There were a couple instances where, yeah, like that was pretty dangerous, but I really thought there were going to be malicious events occurring, and not so much. Anyways, that's the Forgotten Book. As much as I didn't like head over heels love it, I completely recommend it. So have some fun. Let me know what your favorite kind of fairy tale books are, or things that have to do with magic. So I'll see you later. Bye.